and estrogen and the immune system.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So I've talked in the past about, about COVID and the immune system and how women generally do better than men. So what I want to do today is sort of do the background fundamentals of how estrogen and the immune system in women interlink to create a healthy woman. So it turns out that the prime directive of life, whether we like it or not, it is what it is the creation of new life. And as an OBGYN, I spent decades delivering thousands of babies and dealing with issues involving reproductive functions and fertility and pregnancy. And it became pretty obvious to me early on that you need a healthy woman to be successful in pregnancy. And that involves a very complex immune system, because in pregnancy, immune systems are going to be modified by hormonal changes to allow the fetus to grow, an alien creature to grow inside of a woman. So the immune system of a female is really intricate and very complex and very robust. So once you acknowledge and accept that the prime directive of life is the creation of new life, and then to have it happen multiple times over again, then you can really appreciate why estrogen, the dominant hormone produced by the ovaries in the form of estradiol, is about everything in the female body, linking what I call the glue, acting as the glue linking metabolic functions, which includes everything, because metabolism is the production, creation, distribution, utilization of energy in every organ system of the body, and reproductive success. So you need a healthy woman if you're going to have reproductive success. And estrogen is like the overseer of looking at all functions involving both metabolic health, which is everything, and reproductive health. That's why I love to use flowers. Flowers are the reproductive organ of the plant. They're beautiful and essential, and that's reproduction in a female. And when we lose reproductive functionality with menopause, it sort of forecasts and is the prelude into many, many metabolic dysfunctions associated with aging. And when you have abnormal health in a younger woman, you're going to have issues as well, like with endocrine disruptors, poor diet, nutrition, sedentary lifestyle, which will affect hormones and affect both metabolic health and reproductive health and immune health. So in order for reproduction to be successful, we need to have an incredibly robust and responsive immune system. And females have a much more, we're going to go over in more detail, the differences between the male immune system and the female. And this is so commonly not appreciated and completely really overlooked in everything, including things like vaccines, for example. Women will have a much greater robust response to vaccines than do men. And that's never considered in any form or fashion in terms of dosing, but that was shown with the flu vaccine quite some time ago. And estrogen, because it's involved in every function in the female body, is also involved very heavily in immune functions. And when things go wrong, because women have a more robust immune system, when things go wrong, they go wrong in a bigger way in women in terms of autoimmunity. And we'll talk more about that. And linking the immune system is the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiomes we now know are these complex systems within our gut involving trillions of microbes, which interconnect with our own immune system, which lines the gut. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue and the communication system that exists between the gut microbes and our own immune cells. And men and women, as I mentioned, are quite different. Men and women have different gut microbiomes. And this is really fascinating. If you did a fecal transplant, for example, from a male into a female, that female would start producing a lot more testosterone. We're not the same, including with our immune systems, our gut microbiomes, which have a tremendous role in terms of our immune health. And of course, our microbiomes are in trouble, and that's also interlinking with our immune systems being in trouble in many cases. So males and females have quite different immune systems in terms of the robustness and a lot of even the numbers of cells, and in terms of different drivers. It includes these differences are chromosomes. Women have 2 X chromosomes. We'll talk more about that, and how the chromosomes and the genes are expressed through epigenetic modifications, hormones, the microbiome, circadian rhythm, and of course, our age does have an impact. And sex differences in immunology is not just related to humans. We now know that there's a sex-based immunological bias, differences in insects and lizards and other mammals, that their males and females are not just differently colored. Like, look, everyone knows the feathers of different birds. Males and females are different. Lions have manes. We're different. And our immune systems are really different. If we look at the X chromosome, remember, women have 2, men have 1 little Y, but we still love that little Y, but it's quite little, and just 1 X. Well, it turns out that the X chromosome has many, many genes that are involved in immune function. Now, we think of 1 X chromosome in the female being deactivated in every cell, but in reality, in the embryo, that extra X chromosome stays viable and functioning for a few weeks in the embryonic stage of life, which actually epigenetically modifies how the immune system is going to function and changes it in females versus in males. And when that X chromosome is basically silenced or inactivated, it turns out it's not completely inactivated at all, but about 15% of the genes stay active and they're not silenced. And it turns out that most of those genes that stay active on that so-called inactivated X chromosome are related to immune function. So we have really a different genetic programming going back to embryological days in terms of our different chromosomes and throughout the entire life of women. Many people think that this is why women have a little extra statistically longer lifespan than men, is because of the extra X chromosome and the genes involved in immune system functionality that help to prevent sepsis and infections killing women it tends to happen at a little bit older age. So if we look at some of the differences in the genes that are on the sex chromosome, they involve a great variety of different types of immune-related genes. So we have the pattern recognition receptor genes, cytokine receptor genes, transcriptional factor genes. You can see this, that there's quite a bit of difference. And if you don't have things working properly, and you don't have the right hormonal environment, then the chromosomes are not going to fare as well. So, but even in a gonadal steroid deficiency, you still have these extra X chromosomes. And that's, like I said, probably underlies why women live a little bit longer than males statistically. Now, let's look a little bit more at this. Now, estrogen acts on all these different subsets of the immune system, and all of these are estrogen receptor dependent and related to estrogen in a variety of different mechanisms. So we know that directly estrogen affects, look at all these different things, the different toll-like receptors. Estrogen can affect NF-kappa B activity, dendritic cell activity. Those are the little immune cells that put out little fingers to check on what's going on in the world and put out little toll-like receptors looking at the gut and what's going on inside the gut lumen through the little spaces, the junctions between the cells of the lining of the gut. And they affect neutrophil numbers and degranulation. They affect all the different cytokines, B cells, antibody production. So it turns out estrogen is very, very powerful. So you have the X chromosome and you have the direct effect of estrogen. And it turns out that testosterone actually suppresses the immune cell activity. And this is why males traditionally have a higher incidence of non-reproductive organ cancers. So statistically, and this is changing, unfortunately, for women more nowadays because of the presence of the ubiquitous endocrine disruptors that interfere with normal hormone functioning. But testosterone is actually a suppressor of the immune system, and it actually then leads to more cancers in male, like pancreatic cancer, bladder cancer, lung cancer. Statistically, males would have more of those kinds of cancers than females, even given if they had the same activities and exposures. Now, why would nature do this? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. It's all about survival for reproductive success. And then we know that estrogen affects the immune system also indirectly through affecting circadian rhythms and the various microbiomes throughout the body, which then also have an effect on immune function. So it turns out that women have so many differences in terms of how their immune cells are functioning. So women have greater cytotoxic T cell activity than do males, and they have many genes that are upregulated that affect function involving antiviral effects and inflammatory genes. And it turns out that half of the activated genes in the female T cells of the T cell lymphocytes have estrogen response elements in their promoters. So estrogen is very, very involved in the function of lymphocytes. And in the CD4 T cells, females are more likely to produce higher levels of T helper type 1 cytokines, and women have a much greater antibody response than do males. They have higher basal immunoglobulin levels. Women have higher B cell numbers. Women make more antibodies. Women have a bigger, more robust response to every sort of pathogen that can come into the body. Women are designed to survive every kind of infection better than males because of their more robust immune system. They have greater numbers of all of the different types of immune cells, and they have more genes because of their X chromosome that are working in terms of expressing the B cell activity. And I mentioned already that females have a bigger response to vaccines, but when the flip side is because females have such a robust, active immune system, when things go wrong, they're more apt to have autoimmune diseases, which occurs 80% of autoimmune diseases are in females. So we have more of these types of cancers in males, and we have more autoimmune disease in females. Now, what is this all about? Well, the reason that males and females have very different immune systems in terms of their numbers, in terms of their function, it's all about survival for reproductive success. Well, energy is never unlimited. So energy is food, right? So humans evolved during a time of food, often shortages, right? You couldn't count on food. So how the body would utilize energy had to be evolved for optimal fertility and survivability. So it turns out that females are more designed to survive high pathogen loads, and males are more designed to make more sperm. So it turns out that it takes a great deal of energy for males to constantly be producing more sperm and to support a larger, bulkier body, to have, bigger mass, bigger muscles, bigger bones. So the energy of the male is going to be used for making sperm all the time through the whole life and having a bigger body to sustain. A female is smaller and already comes with her pre-made eggs. That's it. She doesn't make any more, so no energy has to go into making new eggs. But she puts a ton of her energy into maintaining this incredibly complex, very active immune system. Because let's be realistic here. If you had a pandemic and you were going to see a lot of deaths, wouldn't it be preferable if ultimately 10 women survived to every male versus 10 males to every female? That would not be viable. You can't have 10 males to every female. I think that's happening in China. That's not working out too well. So that's not because of pathogens, that's because of, reproductive choice. So we know that women are more likely to survive every kind of infection, and men are more likely to succumb. And that is so that the human race can continue. Because if you lost a lot of males, but you had a bunch of females still alive, those surviving males who are pretty hardy would then help to make a whole new bunch of people. And then life goes on for the human race. And all that energy can still go into making lots of sperm so that we can have more babies. So estrogen, I consider the mother hormone because it is the master of all metabolic functions, maintains metabolic homeostasis and immune function, all interlinked. So what's the purpose of a hormone? A hormone is an information delivery system. It's the language of the body. It's how the brain tells different cells to do what they should do. So if you take the hormone, that the brain puts out a signal to the pituitary, and then the pituitary puts out a signal to the ovary, and then the ovary makes the hormone estrogen, which circulates, and there are receptors all over the body. And estrogen has at least 3 different types of receptors: alpha, beta, and a membrane receptor, and there may be variations on the membrane receptors. So different organs have different relationships, ratios of these different receptors, and it creates a signal either through the nucleus of the cell, creating the production of a protein, or it creates a kinase that's rapidly produced in the cell membrane that ultimately creates an effect in the cell. So you have to have this important information delivered. That's why hormones and the right amount of hormones and the right rhythm of hormones is so critical to having all the cells of the body function properly. And it turns out that estrogen was present in many creatures like mollusks, like clams, that don't have reproduction anything like humans, because estrogen was all about metabolic success, keeping the organism healthy. In fact, estrogen was probably the first steroid hormone that existed. It predates every other steroid hormone in terms of the receptors. And so it goes back that estrogen has existed in life forms going way back to invertebrates, going way back. And we know from lots of research that estrogen plays roles throughout the body. As I mentioned, there's estrogen receptors everywhere, and we're going to focus primarily on the immune system, the gut, and in terms of the brain and the circadian rhythm. And I didn't have time to talk about it in this particular lecture, but the entire endocannabinoid system, which is now very much high on everybody's radar. The endocannabinoid system is a signaling system involving lipids, and it is completely intertwined with the reproductive system as well as the peripheral system, and intertwined with estrogen and progesterone. So once again, estrogen is always playing a role in everything. So just a couple of quick basics. There are, as I mentioned, 3 basic types of receptors, alpha and beta, and membrane receptors, that there may be different types. And the alpha and beta receptors were primarily considered to be nuclear receptors. They would work within the nucleus of the cell to create messenger RNA, and then you would have transcription of a protein and so on. And now we know that they're more complex. Everything is always more complex than we first thought. And they also work on the membrane to create more rapid responses, because it takes quite a while to create a protein through the nucleus, but you can create rapid responses through the membrane. And it turns out that these receptors interact with one another. So estrogen receptor beta, high stimulation or binding to estrogen receptor beta, can actually downregulate estrogen receptor alpha. So there's it's really interconnectivity. And as it turns out, the immune cells of the body have different estrogen receptors. The primary receptor on the innate immune cells, like macrophages, neutrophils, mast cells, is alpha. And the primary estrogen receptors on the B cells that make the antibodies is primarily the beta receptor. So it's very interesting the way nature created different organ systems and cells have a predominance of different receptor types and how they intertwine. And we're just still learning. We're still basically at the beginning stages of understanding all of this. And there's 3 main types of estrogen. There's maybe a 4th, but we won't go into that. And estrone, which works predominantly on estrogen receptor alpha, estriol, the estrogen of pregnancy, which works predominantly on estrogen receptor beta, and estradiol, which is the one made by the ovaries, which has a balanced effect on all the different estrogen receptors. So pregnancy has a dominant estriol, which is the beta receptor. And if you remember a minute ago, I said high estrogen beta downregulates estrogen receptor alpha. And estrogen receptor alpha is the dominant one on the innate immune cells, what I call them the attack cells. They're the first responders. So in pregnancy, the high amount of estriol is downregulating the receptor for alpha. So basically, it's like taming the innate immune cells. It's dampening their effect. And they're the ones that make all those inflammatory cytokines. And so if you think about it, and we'll talk a little bit more about pregnancy, that pregnancy is a time when you don't want the innate immune cells to attack the fetus. So you're actually dampening down your immune response by having all that estriol, and your innate immune cells are now going to be calmer. Your mast cells are not going to explode and release all their inflammatory content so readily. The neutrophils and macrophages are down-regulated and not going to release as many of their inflammatory cytokines, like the interferons, like the tumor necrosis factor alpha, the interleukins like 6 and so on. And that's why in pregnancy, a lot of autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis go into a remission, okay? Because the estriol is like an immune modulator. And that's also why when women are pregnant, they're more likely to have an adverse outcome if they get infected with different types of pathogens like viruses. So if a pregnant woman catches the flu or COVID or chickenpox, things like that, they're more likely to die or get pneumonia or a worse outcome because their innate immune cells are down regulated. So that's a very big deal. And that's why I do not recommend that estriol be used as a major treatment in postmenopausal women, because it is down regulating alpha, but the alpha is on our innate immune cells. And so we're not really trying to dampen our ability to fight off infections in postmenopausal women, right? Now, the reason that estriol has been used in breast cancer is that breast cancer is always estrogen receptor alpha active, okay? So when you have high beta, you're down-regulating alpha. So you can sort of down-regulate that alpha receptor so it won't bind as well to the breast cancer. Okay, so now that's how estriol was used, and that's what tamoxifen is doing. So it's interfering with these receptors, and that also has effects on immune cells. So it's important that you understand this because this will help make sense. Now, estrone, which is the dominant estrogen of menopause, it's produced by the conversion of the androgens coming from the adrenal gland into estrone in fat tissue. And the more fat tissue, the more estrone you'll have. And estrone works predominantly on estrogen receptor alpha. Remember, that's the estrogen receptor that breast cancer acts on, and also the innate immune cells. So if you have tons of alpha, you're going to, and you don't have the beta, you're going to upregulate the innate immune cells and promote more inflammation in the body. So that's the last thing we want. That's one of the reasons why postmenopausal women who make a lot of estrone are more in a pro-inflammatory state and are more apt to develop breast cancer. So we do not want to have that kind of estrogen. But the poor thing, estradiol, which is the balanced estrogen receptor binder, is not either estriol or estrone. It's estradiol. But poor estradiol is always taking the brunt of what estrone does, right? So people think bad things about estradiol because estrone is all E1, is all estrogen receptor alpha. Now, estrogen receptor alpha is not evil. It's very important because alpha is also in the hypothalamus. It helps regulate appetite. It does many other very important things with metabolism. So we want the balanced effect. That's why in menopausal women, I will always use estradiol And estradiol can be converted to both estriol and estrone, but hopefully the body, given all the right nutrients and everything else, will make the proper conversion. So I'm not micromanaging the estrogen. I'm just giving what the body was designed to have. Of course, there's nothing natural about giving hormones to a menopausal woman, but when we understand the potential benefits and the negatives of aging and losing our ovarian function, and in terms of all of these things and how it affects our immune system, because what is aging? Inflammaging. It's activation of the immune system into a pro-inflammatory state, which is promoted by estrone, but not by estradiol. So we now know that estrogen receptors reside throughout the entire body and has immense effects on the immune system. And we know that when you don't have enough estrogen, you go into a chronic pro-inflammatory state, because estrogen is an immune system modulator. That's really important to know. Estrogen helps every phase of the immune reaction. So estrogen helps to initiate the immune system pro-inflammatory
Okay, so at the bottom.
Do you need a minute? So estrogen initiates the immune system response to like a pathogen or damage, the PAMPs and the DAMPs, and estrogen flips the switch from a pro to an anti-inflammatory state. So we need to recognize what estrogen does. Estrogen, when we talk about estrogen, I'm talking about estradiol, okay, the estrogen of the ovary, the dominant estrogen of reproductive women. So estrogen is an immune modulator. It activates and it suppresses inflammation appropriately. When you need it, it turns it on. When you don't need it, it turns it off. That's why people get so confused about estrogen, because it does it all. It's a modulator. And as I mentioned, half of all the activated genes in the female T cells are estrogen response element in their promoters, that they have that. So it's very important. So it's all about survival. Having proper immune system is essential for survival. And remember, we are living in a sea of pathogens, and our tissues die, and we need to gobble them up. The immune system, the macrophages gobble up the dying and dead cells, the senescent cells, and it all has to work to protect the body. We need an immune system that can distinguish self from non-self, clear away the dead damaged tissue, as I said. And so we have this very complex system, and estrogen modulates every process involved in it. Here are just some of the genes that are involved in the innate and adaptive immune system that are regulated by estrogen. I mean, it's just phenomenal that people just are not aware of the incredible role that estrogen plays in immune function. So in terms of fighting infections, we have, of course, this unbelievable biological defense system through the innate immune system that is activated when pathogens get into the body. They cross through our barriers, and that's where the mast cells are all lined up. And we have toll-like receptors, and they can recognize all of these different types of pathogens. Macrophages recognize them, mast cells recognize them. And all of these systems, by the way, are tightly controlled through their circadian clock genes. All of our toll-like receptors are timed, and we have different immune systems actually at different times of the day. And it's all about survival once again. So we have an integrated response with our toll-like receptors and our immune system to activate the immune system's response for greatest survival. And that's really important. Once again, it's all about survival. So we have reproductive success, and this, the species continues. So if we look at the first line responders, they're mast cells, neutrophils, monocytes, macrophages, and these are all involved with estrogen. So a phagocytosis, which is a critical process involved in gobbling up and then dissolving the pathogens, is estrogen mediated. Now, what's a similar thing to phagocytosis? Actually, autophagy. Autophagy is when a cell regenerates its internal organelles through gobbling them up and then using the foundational amino acids, fatty acids. And most people don't know this, but autophagy is estrogen regulated. Without adequate estrogen, you can't do autophagy properly. You can't do phagocytosis properly. Now, for men, I want you to know that you should love estrogen. just as much as women, because you have tons of estrogen. So you use estrogen just like a woman does. But where does your estrogen primarily come from? Converting testosterone into estradiol. So all estradiol in the ovary comes from testosterone. It comes like an assembly line. The ovary first makes testosterone, and then it goes to the granulosa cells where it's converted into estradiol through the enzyme aromatase. Well, men make tons of estradiol. They make it locally in the organs. Many, many, many organs make estradiol, and they have the enzyme aromatase. Now, that doesn't circulate in the bloodstream. It's a local effect. So if you measure blood levels, it's not going to show it. It's their local effects. And so it's really important that men have adequate levels of testosterone so that they will in turn not just have testosterone, but have adequate levels of estradiol and be able to function. But their estradiol levels, even though they make a plenty of it, their levels are still going to be far less than females because they have a different function to serve in our world. So I want to show you here, this shows a mast cell, and it shows the toll-like receptors and how it can bind to different things and how it releases all of these inflammatory processes, all these inflammatory contents when it degranulates. But I wanted the take-home message to be, see, it says ER alpha, that's estrogen receptor alpha. So for any of you doubters there, here's our mast cell, and it shows right there, estrogen receptor alpha. None of the proper responses of mast cell will happen if you don't have the proper amounts and functionality of estrogen receptor alpha. Now, we know, unfortunately, we live in a sea of endocrine disruptors, and these chemicals can interfere with the function of estrogen receptor alpha as well. And that can be leading to what people call mast cell problems, you know? So when people have mast cell problems and they're actually degranulating inappropriately and so on, mast cell problems can be related to endocrine disruptors that are interfering with the normal functioning of your estrogen receptor alpha on your mast cells. So always think, gee, I wonder if this person has a high toxic body load of BPA or other, phthalates or other chemicals that are endocrine disruptors, pesticides and flame retardants and so on, that can be giving you your mast cell dysfunction. So now what about others? It turns out if we look at every single innate immune cell, we find that estrogen impacts every single one. In terms of neutrophils, estrogen helps regulate their number and the function, all these different functions of neutrophils, chemotaxis, how they infiltrate the production of their poisons for the pathogens, myeloperoxidase, superoxide anion, and they induce the chemokines that call in the troops so that other immune cells come to the scene of the crime, so to speak. They induce the production of the cytokines and regulate the genes of the neutrophils. In terms of macrophages, it's a similar thing. It regulates macrophages, it activates them. Macrophages, wherever macrophages are in the body, they can be in two states, either a quiet surveillance state or they can be active and they're doing their job, not in terms of surveillance, but actively gobbling up, pathogens or dead tissue. And it turns out that estrogen helps regulate whether the macrophages are in that quiet observational state, surveilling, or they're in the gobbling up stage. And when you don't have enough estrogen, it loses control and it always goes into the default state of being in that pro-inflammatory state. And wherever the macrophages are, that's what happens. And where are macrophages besides in the blood? Well, they're in the brain. In the brain, they're called the microglia. And when you don't have enough estrogen in the brain, which is what happens to females and why their immune system is very important in underlying the development of Alzheimer's disease, you have microglia like weapons of mass destruction without control. Without adequate estrogen produced in the brain or coming from the ovaries, you end up in an estrogen deficient brain state, and that causes the macrophages of the brain, which are called the microglia, to go from their quiet surveillance state into their active state, where they are like putting out all of their poisons and they're dissolving healthy neurons. So they're like weapons of mass destruction without control when you don't have enough estrogen. Now, what about in the bone? The bone macrophages are called osteoclasts. And without adequate estrogen, the osteoclasts also go into a state of craziness, and they put out their like digestive enzyme type stuff. They're enzymes that they produce, like myeloperoxidase and so on, that dissolve the bone. And so you have uncontrolled dissolving of the bone, and then that leads to the accelerated incidence of osteoporosis in women. 80% of osteoporotic fractures occur in females, and it's an immune disease. That's what people don't know. Osteoporosis is due to dysregulated immune system of women in the menopause because they don't have enough estrogen, and their immune cells that gobble up bone, the osteoclasts, which are specialized macrophages, are like weapons of mass destruction gobbling up the bone. And it happens in the brain, it happens in the bone, and in the arteries, it happens in the artery walls. And then you end up with damaged artery walls, and then you get plaque, and then you get heart attacks and strokes. After menopause, from around 60, 65 on, women have more strokes and ruptured aneurysms than men do. And women have the same incidence of having problems with heart attacks, but they die more from their first heart attacks. And from age 65 on, women have more hypertension than men. So don't underestimate the immune system problems. Remember, women have this gigantically robust immune system, but when things go wrong, they go wrong in a bigger way. Now, the dendritic cells, they're the cells of the immune system that act as the interfaces between the innate and adaptive immune system. So they, through the connecting to the toll-like receptors, give information. They relay information from the innate immune cells to the adaptive cells. The adaptive cells are the ones that make the antibodies. So all of that depends on having proper estrogen. So they're the antigen presenters to the T cells and the B cells. And they also help regulate the expression of cytokines and chemokines, and they control the maturation of the dendritic cells. Estrogen modulates all aspects of T cells, including the Th1, Th2, 17, Tregs. All of that is estrogen mediated. And so that's really important to be aware. And when you don't have the right estrogen, you end up with a problem. If you don't, they did experiment with mice, and they can do this. They bred mice that don't have an estrogen receptor alpha. So remember, I said estrogen receptor alpha isn't evil, just because that's the estrogen receptor that breast cancer binds to. It doesn't make it evil. It's estrogen receptor alpha. When you breed mice that don't have it, they essentially develop lupus. So maybe, women who obviously are the ones who predominantly get lupus, they have malfunctioning of their estrogen receptor alpha. So it's a very fascinating, different sort of an autoimmune disease. But once again, it's related to estrogen malfunction, in this case involving the receptor alpha. And so this is all, fascinating in terms of the T lymphocyte function and the estrogen relationship. The B cells that make the antibodies are all estrogen modulated, and have the different receptors, and they're in different amounts. And estrogen increases plasma cells and the antibody production. Once again, when things go wrong and you have like a leaky gut, and you have toxins and different bacteria coming in to the immune system that lines the gut, you get an overly robust production of antibodies against the invader. And these antibodies cross-react with our own tissues, because it's important to know that we all come from the same primordial pool, you might say. So our RNA and DNA is very comparable to the RNA and DNA of bacteria and viruses. So when we make antibodies against a virus or a bacteria, it will always cross-react with our own tissues, but it's supposed to be short-lived, and we can get over it as long as the antibody production is not going to go on and on in large numbers. Then you have a chronic infection, and that can lead to autoimmune disease. If you have a chronic leaky gut, that's like a chronic infection, because you have abnormal influx of bacteria and viruses through the leaky gut, through the impaired gut barrier, into the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, where you then have this robust reaction from females, and they make all these antibodies which cross-react with similar tissues of our own body that have a similar protein structure to the protein structure of the invading bacteria or viruses that are coming in through the leaky gut. And that creates autoimmunity. So any chronic infection, whether it's Epstein-Barr or herpes or HPV or leaky gut, can lead to autoimmunity. And women have these great ability to make antibodies, and they go top over, over the top, making antibodies that create these autoimmune things. So we need to think about all the things that can cause leaky gut. How about birth control pills? They give you leaky gut. Menopause gives you leaky gut. Endocrine disruptors. So, and if you use the wrong hormones in menopause, like medroxyprogesterone acetate, like Provera and Premarin, they can give you leaky gut. So anything that gives you leaky gut is going to promote autoimmunity in females. And lymphocytes, I'm not going to go into this in more detail, but know that they are totally related to the effects of estrogen. And all of the inflammatory processes are related to estrogen. And it's not just estrogen, it's levels of estrogen. So estrogen has different effects depending on the level. If you think about a menstrual cycle, when is it most inflammatory? Okay, during the period, when a woman is bleeding, that is when her estrogen level is the lowest of the entire menstrual cycle, is when she is on her period and is bleeding. That is a pro-inflammatory state. The uterine lining is dead, it's dying, it's coming out, and you're making inflammatory prostaglandins in the endometrium. That's what promotes cramping. Now, a little bit of cramping is normal. When it's extreme and it's unlivable, then obviously there's too much inflammation. And then that's a sign that you need to work on a more a pro-life in terms of health, and an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, because that woman is too inflamed. And that's why she goes over the top, making too many pro-inflammatory prostaglandins in her uterus and has all that cramping going on. And it's usually having a problem with her endocannabinoid system, which is hormonally related. When a woman has a lot of inflammation, that downregulates the production of progesterone. And progesterone helps to modulate the inflammatory response to the retrograde menstruation and the inflammatory response. So progesterone is, I'm not talking about too much because we don't have time, but progesterone is a key player in everything that happens. And inflammation that's out of control is going to downregulate progesterone. That helps to balance the effect of low estrogen during the period time of the menstrual cycle. So when you have very low estrogen, it's a more pro-inflammatory state, and high estrogen, which is like when a woman spikes her estrogen, which just precedes the induction of ovulation, is the most anti-inflammatory state. Now, you would want to be the most anti-inflammatory when you're about to have sperm come in, because you don't want your innate immune cells to attack and kill the sperm. So it's like our whole immune systems are evolved to allow fertility. So when you have that high spike of estrogen, it downregulates the innate immune cells, okay? So that is very good because it's an anti-inflammatory effect, so we don't kill the sperm. So as I mentioned, 80% of autoimmune disease in females, and here are the ones that are most pronounced in females. And I think you already know why, but just talking a little bit more about the gut microbiome, we cannot underestimate its critical significance, and that estrogen plays a big role in the determination of the microbiota composition of the body's, all the microbiomes, including the gut. And as I mentioned, females have different microbiomes than males, and there are many other factors. Nothing is just one thing. So it's certainly not just hormones. There are many other factors that have an influence on the microbiomes, particularly the gut microbiome. And in this slide, I just show it so that when at the top where you have the healthy gut microbiome, you have that healthy mucus protectant that helps to prevent leaky gut. And on the bottom where you don't show that gray mucus, you have a leaky gut and you have toxins and pathogens leaking right into the body where you have the immune system that resides, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. It shows the little dendritic cells putting their little finger-like processes. I consider them as like our little human antenna that can detect what the heck is going on, and then they use their toll-like receptors to feel it out and know what's going on. Then they communicate with other immune cells and ultimately with the Peyer's patches where the B cells are and the T cells that then make the antibodies. And you have an explosion of inflammatory response when you have leaky gut, and you're going to promote systemic inflammation, which leads to brain dysfunction. You have neuroinflammation, then you get vascular inflammation. It goes throughout the whole body. And we know that the gut immune system is hugely interfacing with the immune system. So many times we call it the gut immune brain axis, but you can say the gut immune skin axis. And when it's abnormal, you're more likely to get acne. And the gut immune heart axis. So now we know that everything connects through the gut microbiome, the immune system, and every other organ system in the body. And when you have a dysbiotic gut microbiome, gut inflammation, you end up with an altered immune system. Here it shows with dysbiosis, reduced T regulatory cells, which can lead to an increase in asthma and autoimmunity, which are really flip sides of the same coin. Systemic inflammation, which is underlying all the conditions of aging and disease states. And you have downregulation of immune responsiveness, which increases your susceptibility to both cancer and infections. So the gut microbiome is hugely important. And we know that estrogen reduces endotoxin production. How amazing is that? By decreasing the concentration of pathogenic bacteria, and helps to improve the gut status and reduces leaky gut and systemic inflammation. So we know that there's this huge interrelationship between estrogen, the microbiome, and the immune system. In fact, estrogen is so important, there's a separate microbiome just for interfacing and detoxifying estrogen called the Estradiol. And that's another whole lecture in itself, but there are actually, the estrogen is so important that there's a microbiome just for estrogen. And that's key to being healthy. And here it just shows when you have the wrong microbiome, it leads to all kinds of diseases that involve the immune system. And here it shows, once again, when you have the wrong microbiome involving estrogen, the estradiol, you end up with many reproductive related diseases, cancer, metabolic syndrome, obesity. All these different things are related to having the wrong estrogen metabolism within the gut microbiome. And I already mentioned quite a bit about pregnancy, so I don't have to really go into it more, but it's really important to understand that pregnancy is a very unique state when the immune system is modulated to allow the body to hang on and sustain this alien creature growing within the uterus and not kill it. And when you don't have the right hormonal balance, you can end up with frequent habitual abortions, pregnancy-related complications. So it's really important to see how interfacing estrogen is with the immune system during pregnancy, and why you want to have a healthy woman to conceive. That's why I emphasize over and over, get healthy before you try to get pregnant. It's so important. You don't want to get pregnant and you're already in a state of chronic elevated inflammation. And menopause, sadly, is a state of chronic inflammation. And so we need to recognize that and take steps to reduce inflammation, the underlying foundation of all the ills of aging. And just going back, just touching on the gut composition is quite changed. I mentioned that the estrogen of pregnancy, estradiol, has a tremendous impact on how innate immune cells are functioning. Well, it turns out that the gut microbiome is totally altered in pregnancy to create a very mild state of leaky gut. Now, why on earth would you want to have leaky gut in a pregnant woman? Well, it's very finely tuned in a healthy woman so that she has a little bit of inflammation. Now, why would we want inflammation? Because inflammation induces insulin resistance. And we want pregnant women to have a little bit of insulin resistance, not enough to develop gestational diabetes. That's what happens when you go over the line and you're not healthy when you become pregnant, okay? So you get gestational diabetes, you get preeclampsia, all those diseases of pregnancy are because the woman wasn't healthy enough before she became pregnant and may have environmental toxin loads and so forth. And what happens is you get this low level of inflammation in pregnancy due to leaky gut, due to changes in the hormones, and that creates insulin resistance. And the purpose of having insulin resistance in pregnancy is because insulin promotes fat production and storage. And pregnant women will put on weight and put on fat even when they don't eat more, because they become mildly insulin resistant. And then you have higher levels of circulating glucose, which crosses the placenta and helps to fatten up the little baby so that the baby gets enough nutrients and enough glucose to develop its own little fat deposits, so that you get a nice little healthy baby born that can then survive. And you have a nice woman who's now going to have some fat stores so she can nurse her baby, even if it's going to be a bit of a food shortage coming up. So nature is all about survival. So it wants women to have a little bit of extra insulin to promote fat production and storage, and extra glucose circulating so that she can produce more fat from it and feed her baby. But when it goes over the line, that's when you get all the pregnancy complications. And this all requires a healthy gut microbiome to develop it properly and not go over the top and become so terribly leaky that you end up with over the top inflammation, and then you have pregnancy complications. So these are really, really important. And the pregnancy changes that occur are really interesting, and they're developed at different stages of pregnancy. You're going to have different gut microbiomes, and it's just a whole fascinating area of research that's going on. And in terms of, I wanted to touch on the circadian rhythm. Well, the circadian rhythm is also very involved with hormones and health. And when you don't have the proper estrogen, it turns out that you're going to have circadian rhythm dysfunction. And when you don't have circadian rhythm function, then you end up having metabolic dysfunction and immune system dysfunction. As I mentioned, the entire immune system is circadian. At different times of the day and night, your immune system is different. You probably know that if you're going to be measuring natural killer cells, you measure them first thing in the morning. You don't measure them at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The immune system is circadian, and hormones are circadian. And all of this relies on having proper functioning clocks, clock genes, and the master clock in the brain. And there are many disruptors to our circadian rhythm, which create all kinds of health problems, and loss of estrogen, going on birth control pills, going through menopause, endocrine disruptors can all interfere with our normal circadian rhythm. And I put this slide in case there are any doubters, that estrogen is critical for the master clock and the circadian rhythm of the body. If you see here, SCN stands for suprachiasmatic nucleus, and you see ER beta, that means there are estrogen receptor beta on the master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a group of neurons that sits atop the optic nerve and senses light and dark and nutrients. And the KISS peptides, the KISS peptins right there, KISS1, that is the peptides that are signaled to go to the area of the hypothalamus that then puts out the little signal to the pituitary, which then puts out the LH and FSH, the gonadotropins, that then cause the proper ovulation and menstrual cycle functioning, and all completely linked with the master clock. Having a regular, healthy circadian rhythm is essential for reproduction, for proper balanced hormones. That's why women have to go to bed. They have to go to bed at the right time. They have to get enough sleep. They have to get adequate sunlight. They need to have a dark room at night. They need to eat at fixed times of the day, not eat late at night. All of those things will help to regulate their clocks. And bright light in the morning helps to set the master clock, which tends to drift every day just a little bit. And here you can see ER alpha, that's over there on those two like purple and sort of aqua color. Those are the nutrient sensors. And you see E2, E2 stands for estradiol. Estradiol is essential for the functioning of the nutrient sensors of the brain. And when you don't have enough estradiol, guess what? Then you go into default, which is binge eating disorder. And women have way higher rates of binge eating disorder than do males. And you can see it's all linked with reproduction. And we know the master clock is linked with every metabolic function as well in the body. And when women who work shift work, and many women do work shift work, they will have a dysfunctional immune system and all the things that go with it. Like when they work at night. I used to deliver babies all the time at night. Who knows what the heck? It's amazing I'm alive, I think, because my immune system had to be really challenged by my crazy lifestyle. But there are plenty of nurses in my practice who work at night, and I have to tell them the truth. Police officers, there are many jobs now. Something close to 1/3 of people work at the wrong time of the day for what their bodies are genetically programmed with their circadian rhythm. And of course, it leads to many menstrual dysfunctions, infertility, and as well mood disorders, sleep dysfunction, and increased risk of cancers and immune system dysfunction in general, because you're playing around with this highly circadian immune system, which becomes dysfunctional when you work and at the wrong time of day. And we won't go into all the details here, but the clock genes are very interconnected with the immune system, which is interconnected with our hormones. Here are the immune cells of the CNS. The ones that is particularly different are the microglia. Microglia are simply the specific specialized macrophages found in the brain. They're also found in the enteric nervous system. So you have the central nervous system, the CNS, and its friend, the enteric nervous system, also known as the second brain, which is part of the gut. And they have both of them, both of those neurological systems, big complex neurological systems, have microglia, these specialized immune cells. And it turns out that these are really key to functioning. And when you don't have the right estrogen, you're going to have malfunction of your microglia. And estrogen, as I mentioned, helps to control the production of lipopolysaccharides, which can cross into the brain and activate the microglia. And I wanted to put up this slide just to show you, this is like if you have brain, ischemic brain, any kind of trauma to the brain, but it can also be through aging. Estradiol to the rescue, okay? And the brain will actually make estrogen and progesterone because they are neuroprotective hormones. But in women, they get most of their estradiol not from making it in the brain as men do. Men make tons of estradiol in the brain. Women can't because they don't have as much precursor. They don't have the testosterone levels like men. So they can't make as much even if they need it. They have to get it from their ovaries. Well, we have a time limit on our ovarian function called menopause. And then we don't have enough estradiol in our brain to control our immune cells of our brain. So when you have adequate estradiol in the brain, the immune cells of the brain, the microglia, the astrocytes, which are relatives of the microglia, they are properly controlled. So they don't go crazy into over-the-top activation, creating this crazy inflammatory response. Estradiol activates it, but it also dampens it. So it's, like I said, it's a modulator. It keeps it under control. So you don't have wild, uncontrolled inflammation in the brain, even after trauma or infection. So we definitely want to give, I feel, we want to give the vast majority of women a balanced immune system by supporting their hormones in menopause in a physiologic way. Physiologic means as close as we can to getting the levels of a normal, healthy woman, like when she's 25. That's what we want. That's what we need in order to maintain a healthy immune system, a healthy gut microbiome, a healthy circadian rhythm. So I always want to nourish my gut microbiome. So this is the type of diet I recommend, high in complex carbs, so these are the food, what that's fermented by the gut microbes, right? So, and this has been shown to actually reduce things like diabetes and helps regulate all the functions of the body because you've got to nurture your gut microbiome. So I speak against, especially for women, a ketogenic type of diet, because that's not going to help restore a healthy gut microbiome and actually can cause more circadian rhythm dysfunction and a more leaky gut when you have too much fat. And women can almost never stay in ketosis. We're not designed for that. We're not designed to be in ketosis. So we have to eat almost 100% fat to stay in ketosis. That's not a balanced diet. So I recommend a plant-based diet with tons of healthy vegetables and beans and legumes and nuts and seeds and all that yummy stuff, and lots of fermented foods, lots of root vegetables and leafy greens. It will really help establish a good, healthy gut. And I do not recommend initially for people who are unhealthy to eat a lot of animal protein because it's converted into bad things like TMAO and nitrosamines. But later they can add a little bit of animal protein because I'm not into long-term veganism, but just a little bit, like typically 3 ounces. Now, when you get older, you can have more, like over 70. And I want to have meal timing. So I want a big healthy breakfast, early dinner, not to eat snacks because that is very confusing for our clocks, and to try to have 13 hours from dinner to breakfast. That's all you need. You can have more than that, but it's limited return on the investment once you go over 13 hours. And consider other periodic fasting. And we can talk about, I'm like big on fasting. I've worked with Walter Longo. My office was the beta test site, the first site to use the fasting mimicking diet. So I'm extremely familiar with it, and I'd be happy to talk more about fasting another time if that's of interest to people. In terms of sleep hygiene, I can't told the benefits of sleep enough. You really need it. That's when your brain has this massive amount of blood flow. Your immune system is really rejuvenating and doing its job, and you have changes in your hormones. It's amazing. It's not a deactivated time. It's a very active time. It's just different. So we definitely want to have proper sleep hygiene to encourage a great night's sleep. And I talked about fasting. That's one of my favorite topics. And there are fasting mimetics like resveratrol, alpha lipoic acid, berberine, and exercise that can help mimic the same benefits of fasting, which activates AMP kinase, which helps you to actually burn fat and proper insulin usage. Exercise is a critical thing for maintaining health. The gut microbial biodiversity increases when you exercise more. It improves every aspect of health. So exercise is like the universal medicine. So make sure you always incorporate exercise. It will reduce inflammation, and that's what we need to control inflammation as we age. But at all ages, now they're talking about younger people becoming inflamed, and they call it metaflammaging, metabolic dysfunction leading to inflammation. So what's the take-home message? We females are sorry, guys. We have a bigger, more robust immune system. We're more likely to live a little bit longer. We're less likely to die of infections, but we are way more likely to have autoimmune diseases. When things go wrong, we go way wrong because we don't have enough estrogen after menopause. We are almost 3 times more likely to get Alzheimer's disease. We are just as likely to have horrible problems with our cardiovascular system. We are just as likely to get colon cancer. So we are like on easy street when we're healthy and do the right things up till menopause. After that, oh goodness gracious, it's not such a great picture for us females. So that's why I'm a strong advocate for human bioidentical physiologic hormone therapy, along with all the appropriate lifestyle choices, so that we can have a healthy, robust immune system that doesn't take us down, because we don't want these weapons of mass destruction that are so robust in women to lack the control. And the control is estradiol, the great modulator of the immune system. So when we get everything right, when we have exercise and love and light and the right foods, and we eat, and sometimes we don't eat, we can have health. And thank you so much for joining me. And this is my new book, Menopause, 50 Things You Need to Know, available on Amazon. I hope you'll buy it. It tells you, it's like a little encyclopedia of everything through the 3 stages of menopause: perimenopause, the first decade, and then thereafter. Little plug for me.
Thanks so much for the talk, Doctor.
Oh, I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. This is Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
I'm a OBGYN. I wanted to get your opinion of the 4-day fasting mimicking diet Walter Longo is going to be studying for cancer. So when you're getting chemo, you go 3 days of fasting and then 24 hours later fasting.
Well, the data is very good so far, that when that happens, you actually tell cells, like you trigger the cells to go into the healthy cells to go in sort of a protective mode, so that they're less likely to be damaged from the chemo. But the cells that are cancerous do not have the ability to go into that protective mode. So it's really brilliant to harness the body's own innate mechanisms for survival and protection, while at the same time allowing the cancer to be just as responsive to the chemo. So it's protective, and you may be able to use higher doses of chemo that way, protecting your healthy cells and allowing the chemo to better do its job, and maybe even at higher doses that will be more killing to the cancer. So I think that this is actually going to become the new way of oncology practice.
Thank you. That's fascinating to hear. I'd love to have Bill invite you to do a talk on fasting. That would be good.
Well,
So-
happy to if you want.
Anytime. There's an endless number of Tuesdays before I retire. So.
And I probably won't retire because
I'm not going to retire.
Okay, yeah, I don't have enough hobbies. This is too fun.
So
I've tried a lot of crafts, and I'm not very good at knitting, crocheting, painting, needlepoint. I don't make these great creations. I can't do that all day, so I'll just keep doing this stuff.
Yeah, well, we have in our group a number of ballroom dancers. So if you
that is fun. I used to do it.
Up.
I have to get back to it. Yeah, that's great exercise.
We at OMED, which is the AOA scientific convention, they actually had a little dance competition, and guess which subspecialty won? So
oh well, wouldn't orthopedics?
Yeah, no, it was us.
Oh, you won. I was hoping you'd say you won, but I wasn't.
Yes, it was us. Okay, I got a couple of questions in the chat. First question is, and I was going to ask you this myself actually, do you ever prescribe estrogen for men for any reason? So I've been actually looking some. I personally, I hate anything that has to do with COVID. I want to run from it. I can't stand it anymore. But I've read somewhere there's in I think it was in New York, they're using estrogen patches for men for acute COVID as to boost the immune system. Anything? Have you heard anything about that, or have you ever?
You know what? I know that they started that study, and I have searched, and I've never seen them publish it. Does anyone have that? I know that, and I saw that, and I was kind of surprised by that they were going to give. It's quite a small dose of estrogen, so I don't think that it would have been an adequate dose to have enough of an effect and so forth. And there's, and no matter what you do, you can't get that extra X chromosome that we have. But, estrogen alone has tremendous benefits, but I don't know that actually did anything. And I'm not sure. I think that you need to have the hormones on board before you get infected with the virus. By the time, I don't think they ever published, but I'm going to go back and look for that study. But I'm aware it was in New York, and they were using a little, estrogen patch. And they were giving. I
think it was only for 5 days, from what I remember.
I know. It just seemed like I just felt like whoever was doing that really didn't totally understand. They had a little bit of an idea, an inkling, that estrogen helps the immune system, but they didn't totally get it, And I think that remember I told you it's level response, and that's a very small dose. That would give you a level in the average person, picograms of estradiol of typically like maybe 30. 40, you really would need to get up closer to 100 to have some sort of, and when women have that highest peak of estradiol, when they're the most anti-inflammatory, those levels are like in the 300s, 400s. So they were going to get a level of like 40. I mean, I don't think they get, the total idea of estrogen and its modulation based on dose and level and so on. So I think it was a good effort, but I don't think it did anything. And I don't even think they published.
What about balancing it with progesterone?
Well, you always have to. So if you think of the uterine lining, which is just one organ that, of course, is affected by estrogen in the menopause, the estrogen has many different effects, but one of them is it's pro-healing. So how do you heal? Well, you have to heal by promoting growth of tissue, right? So if you have a gash on your arm, estrogen is actually made in skin. That's how men heal. And you need testosterone to make your estrogen in your skin. So estrogen is made locally in the skin. Of course, in women, it circulates from the ovaries. And estrogen promotes like growth factors. That's like, and it promotes the function of platelets. So it's all about growth, and it's about healing and new blood vessels and so on. The problem is if you have uncontrolled growth in an inflammatory environment, that's like the ticket to cancer, right? Because then if you have a chronically inflamed person, and then you get DNA breakage, and then you throw in like estrogen, that promotes growth. So I think of like in a cancerous kind of state, or like, which could be in the uterine lining if you have an inflamed person, or in the breast, estrogen is not a causation of cancer. It is an accelerant. If you already have DNA breakage, and these are reproductive cancers that end up with estrogen receptor positivity. So they have estrogen receptors on these cancers are functioning. The estrogen, we didn't evolve for cancer, these cancers. These are like a modern invention. So the estrogen is about promoting healing. So it will heal your wounded tissue on your skin, your burn, your gash, and heal wounded tissue wherever it is. It'll heal your arteries if they're injured, but or your brain if it's injured. But the problem is, so the body doesn't interpret cancer or endometriosis as something bad. And estrogen is doing what it's programmed to do, which is promote healing, which is growth. So it promotes new blood vessels, it promotes the growth. So it's like an accelerant. So what you want to do is prevent the inflammation in the first place by having a healthy gut microbiome and having estrogen in the form of estradiol on board, because that will modulate the situation. But if you have only estrogen without its sidekick progesterone, you don't have the balance. So in the uterine lining, progesterone is like the brakes and estrogen is like the gas. Now, if you don't have any inflammation, eventually nothing will happen. You won't get cancer just because you have estrogen. Estrogen doesn't cause cancer. But if you have an inflammatory person and you have inflammation in your uterus, inflammation can cause DNA breakage, and then estrogen can promote the growth of cancer cells because it has estrogen receptors, and we didn't evolve, and our bodies don't distinguish between cancer and damaged tissue. It's just promotes growth and support of it. It's an unfortunate thing, but it's not causing it. So that's why everyone who just takes estrogen isn't going to get uterine cancer. It's if you have inflammation. But since we don't know who does and doesn't really have inflammation in their uterine cavity, we're going to always give progesterone. But progesterone has so many other functions in the body. And, we should do another talk just about progesterone, but because progesterone is neuroprotective. Progesterone is very involved in every organ system as well. Progesterone works with estrogen, and it's a balancing effect. So you would never, even a woman who doesn't have a uterus, I want to emphasize this, even a woman who doesn't have a uterus, you would never give estrogen without progesterone. In fact, progesterone helps activate tumor suppressor genes, so you don't get cancer. Progesterone is like an anti-cancer, and it's, like I said, neuroprotective and works throughout the body to improve all kinds of functions. And progesterone has receptors on immune cells too, and they actually can activate the endocannabinoid receptors on the innate immune cells so that the endocannabinoid system can calm down the immune cells as well. And progesterone is very involved in the endocannabinoid system. So you definitely want to have progesterone on board. So you want to try to give it in a pulsed way. If you give progesterone all the time to a woman, so she only has progesterone, like she has progesterone every day, progesterone works to downregulate the estrogen receptor. So you're actually going to have less benefit from your estrogen if you keep giving progesterone, because it's like a tachyphylaxis thing. Your estrogen receptors are going to be downregulated. That's why some women, if they're on chronic low doses of estrogen and progesterone every day, they start having hot flashes again after a couple of years because their estrogen receptors are downregulated and they're actually not getting the effect of the estrogen. So you really want to, like it or not, you have to try to mimic nature when you try to outsmart nature by giving hormones in menopause, and give pulsed progesterone. So you want to give progesterone for like 14 days a month, not daily. And you may have bleeding, and that's okay. You have to tell women that bleeding is a sign that they're getting an adequate amount of estrogen to build up their uterine lining. And it's not just building up their uterine lining so it can shed, it's building up their brain cells, it's building up their bone cells, So think of it as a sign that you're getting adequate estrogen, not like an annoyance.
Yeah, the
That's all
problem
how you
is
frame it.
I have a lot of experience with this myself. And as you know, the problem is that if they start getting bleeding, first of all, they always tell me they feel better when the progesterone is on board, and when we tell them to stop it, they don't feel so well. That's number one. Number two, if they start getting bleeding, they run to the gynecologist, who's going to do a D&C or a biopsy, and tell them that we don't know what we're doing, and even if we tell them ahead of time. So I'm sure you've come across this. You've had to.
Well, it's easier for me because I am the gynecologist, so I get it. I totally do get it. I mean, it's a difficult world because I have patients that come to me from gynecologists who tell them, and they're like 52 years old. It's not like they're 82. They're like 52, and they're told, no, you shouldn't take any hormones. They're really bad for you. They give you breast cancer and stupid stuff like that, So I get it. Like, it's really hard to reprogram people when, it's like when they used to kidnap the Moonies, try to reprogram them. These people are brainwashed literally into hating estrogen. They hate estrogen. It's like they don't get it. They don't understand what estrogen does. And they just think estrogen was put in the female body to kill the females. I don't know what it's like such a bizarre concept that they don't see menopause for what it is and how it affects all these organ systems in a negative way. So do what you have to do. This is what I always say. You do the best you can. Better is better. Okay. If not having people go and then be told, the other person you're seeing is an idiot, dangerous, and don't ever go back. And then they tell people things that are wrong, but they say it in such an authoritative way that the patient may believe it. So, we see that happening all over the place. People say things. It doesn't, they say it with enough authority.
The folks here have seen my lectures. I always had an endocrinologist put in a patient's note, and I have it in a lot of my things, that he called me a shaman and a disgrace to my degree. And then two paragraphs later, we had given her a little bit of testosterone also. There was no reason to give androgens to women for any reason, and capital NO. This was and this wasn't that long ago. This was just a couple of years ago.
Well, it's so important. That's why, there's like organizations like the International Society for Women's Sexual Health, like ISWICH, I forget their initials. And, they have promoted for probably 20 years that women get testosterone, compounded testosterone, and they're pretty darn mainstream. Many of their faculty are 100% academics and so on. So there's this like little offshoot of, the academic world that has supported a bunch of stuff, that we do, but it's still, they're drowned out by the other voices.
In fact, I'm working on sort of controversies in bioidentical hormone treatment, and one of my topics is progesterone post hysterectomy, yay or nay. And I know what your answer is, and you know what my answer is. But but
the conventional world is no.
Well, there's as I'm sure there's an FDA approved bioidentical estrogen progesterone, and we're not CME, so we can use the brand name here is Bijuva. And if you go to their, you know about this, right? And it's 1 milligram of estradiol and 100 milligrams of progesterone. It's a fixed dose. And if you go on their website, it says right on the front page, if you don't have a uterus, you do not take this. I guess the FDA makes.
You know what? It's very frustrating. Well, one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm trying to get articles published in highly respected mainstream journals, because I realize that I have to talk to people besides the converted. So in December, I have a new article. I've had a few published. I had one a few months back in the British Medical Journal Heart, and I had one just published in December, and it's in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings on estrogen, menopause, and the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And the editor of Mayo Clinic Proceedings picked it as a featured article in their December journal. So I'm hoping that by, writing mainstream articles, if I can get them published, like I've gotten a few published in letters to the editor, that I can start changing the paradigm of thinking in the larger medical community, because so often we just talk to each other and try to get smarter, but the rest of the world is out there and la la land.
I know, we go to
Satan's dumb
A4M
stuff.
or AMMG and it's all gung ho and all, and you come home and it's like, it's just, you just want to
I
tear
know.
your hair out. There's a couple more questions. I think, did you answer this one? What is your opinion of the 4-day fasting mimicking?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You answered that one. Okay. Someone asked, what is the dose of estradiol in menopause? I'm not sure that you need.
Oh, well,
You have an
so you,
estradiol dose at menopause. I know that.
so,
Depends
so the thing is that once you recognize that nature never intended that women get their hormones, through their mouth or their skin or anything like that. So the amount that you give will be totally different in different women, even when you give the same amount. Okay. So like they did the original studies with the estrogen patch, and they had completely different levels in different women. They didn't care because they only cared about one thing. Does it suppress hot flashes? Because that's the FDA approval. They didn't care about, well, what's it doing for the brain, the heart, the gut, or anything, So if you're looking to be physiologic and have a level that's somewhat mimicking a healthy younger woman, because what's your goal? It depends what your goal is. If it's just suppressing symptoms, it doesn't matter what the dose is and what the level is. You just want to suppress the symptoms. If you're looking to try to maintain organ optimal function, then you need to have a level that's more physiologic. So I do a lot of testing for levels, and there's no way to know what the right dose is for anyone. And so anyone who says, I know the dose for everybody just by looking at them, what the heck is that magic? How can you know? Because how you absorb it is going to vary with your blood flow to your skin, your thickness of your skin, your fat, in your subdermis and all this stuff. So, and even in the same woman over time, her skin is going to change if she's, using a transdermal, which is the preferred way, because unfortunately, when you take it orally, it will be altered into estrone when it gets into your bloodstream. It won't go in as estradiol. It's just we don't have that ability. I wish we could.
There's got to be some guidelines, somewhere to start.
So I usually, if you use a patch, start with the middle dose, 0.05, and then wait a month and then get an estradiol level. Now, the level that's from a patch, and this is covered by insurance, so it's affordable for people. And we always have to think what's affordable, and it's bioidentical, but the level that you get from the patch will not be the same on the first day, the second day, and the third day that it's on. It just won't be. So I usually say get it on the second day. That's sort of like your average level. If you can, try to get it on the second day that the patch is on. So at least you can try to standardize it from one patch to another. And the goal is that it's at least a 50, that you can get a level of at least a 50 and somewhere up to around 100 or so, like 150. So if you keep it within 100 to 150, between 50 and 150, you'll always be good. And if it's below 50, or if it's just barely over 50, then you may want to jump up to the next level. You just have to wait a month to get the level. And that would be like the 0.075. And then, then you can go up to the 0.1. Now, some people can get plenty level, high level on the 0.1 or the 0.075. Typically the 0.05 is too little, but it's a good place to start. But if you don't absorb it well from the patch, or they get a reaction, by 5% may get a rash or something, then you could try like Divigel. Divigel is estradiol gel in a little individual pack, 1 pack per day. And I usually, it comes in 5-6 different doses too. I usually, by the time I usually use the gel, I usually start with the 1 milligram. So it's 1 milligram per pack. And then it goes, the highest dose that they sell is 1.25. And that would be the next dose up. If I can't get a decent level in with either of those, and it's still too low, which happens sometimes, then I have to go to compounded estradiol. And then you can apply it, you can try applying it on the inner thigh, or you can apply it on the inner labia minora, where there's like really thin skin. And if you can't get it in and you can't get levels, no matter what you seem to do, the levels just stay really low. That happens in some people. Then if you apply it around the opening of the vagina, the inner labia minora, almost 100% will actually absorb it plenty, and then you can start with you just do a tiny syringe, and you would use only like 1/10 of a milliliter, 0.1 milliliter. And in that, you can put whatever dose you want. I usually would start with like 1 milligram per 0.1 milliliter. And you could start with one milligram a day. And then you could go to twice a day if you need to. And it has to be individualized. You just, like that mantra of sort of like, I don't say start low. I mean, don't want to start with like so low that you're like, but I'll say start medium, and then, go up.
I'm
You
gonna
know,
tell
if
Dr.
you have-
Smith on you. That's she says start low and go slow. That's her mantra.
Well, yeah, well, I think she goes too low.
Okay.
Because I think that's just, everyone's different, because once again, you know what, my goal is I'm just simple-minded in my thinking. I just want to replicate nature's optimal level, and recognizing that low estrogen levels are pro-inflammatory and very high levels are very anti-inflammatory. I'm looking for the sort of that middle road, that level that women are at predominantly, say, in their luteal phase, or their sort of late follicular phase, as opposed to their early follicular phase when they're most inflammatory. I'm not afraid of estrogen at all. I'm afraid of not having estrogen. I'm not afraid. You see, once you get over this fear of estrogen, it's like a whole new world. I embrace it. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid I'm going to overdose people on it with what I'm doing. That's not going to happen, knowing that women, remember, they go up to like 300-400, but I'm not going to sustain people at that level, but you're not going to kill them, So, and if it's transdermal, you're not going to increase blood clotting. It only happens with oral.
And again, the Bijuva people say that they have reformulated it, and they don't get the change in blood clotting from placebo. That's just from their literature.
Well, that may be true, but their dosing is going to be insufficient.
It's a fixed dose. It's 1 milligram estradiol.
Right. Which is quite small. But you know what? I would say, that's better than nothing. I'm always willing to compromise, because I always compare it, like if you compare to placebo, it's better than placebo.
Yeah,
it's better than placebo, for sure.
The claim to fame is that it's an FDA approved drug. So I said, well, so is
there's
so is
something to that.
Oxycontin and so is Oxycontin.
Yeah.
So is Vioxx
Well,
was at one time.
If you get compliance, and you will get some estrogen in, it'd be interesting to check what the levels are of estradiol. That'd be interesting to see.
Is there a way to convert? Let me read it. Is there a way to convert to get more conversion of estrogen from fat tissues and adipocytes to promote more healing in the body? I think what they're asking, is there a way?
No, actually, we're actually trying to dampen that, because unfortunately, when the fat tissue that's doing all that aromatization is typically pro-inflammatory fat, and it's typically making estrone. Now, you don't want to have no fat in the body. In fact, the skinniest people tend not to be the longest lived people. So when I always tell people, women, okay, because that's who I'm usually talking to, once you hit menopause, if you're like maybe 10 pounds so-called overweight, like don't sweat that. Just get fit and and eat healthy food. And that little extra poundage, I mean, maybe I'm dreaming, I'm thinking of me, but if you think that you're 10 pounds, no, I didn't say 20, I just said 10. If you think that 10 pounds of extra fat will do you well when you get older, because it's a little bit like your safety storage fat. Because when you don't have any fat on your body, you have really low fat. Remember, women have to carry more fat than men. Women body compositions are not the same as men. Women won't even ovulate if they don't have 22% body fat typically, okay? Women are supposed to carry more fat. That's what we're designed. We're just different, That's why if you have a set of fraternal twins and they don't do much of anything, but they eat the exact same food, when they're 7 years old, they can wear all the same clothes and maybe can, if they have the same little short haircut, they can pass as one and the other, like they can, even though one's a boy and one's a girl, but when they're 18, that's not going to happen, okay? Because their hormones are their destiny. The male and the female fraternal twins are just going to look, even if they eat the exact same food, they do the same piano lessons, they live and do everything the same, they're in the same school, everything's the same, they're going to have really different looking bodies when they're 18, So hormones are destiny. So, we definitely, and it's a destiny for not just our reproductive hormones, and our reproduction, but really our immune systems, our cardiovascular systems, our neurological systems. And we need to understand and celebrate the differences. And that's why they need to start doing more drug trials separately, male and female, because they're not the same. Like I keep telling Dr. Longo that you got to do some studies of fasting in women, not just men, because you're going to get a different effect. If women don't have estrogen on board, you're not going to get the autophagy, the programs, the apoptosis, you're not going to get activation of the sirtuins. All that relies on estrogen. Estrogen is key for, burning fat, mitochondrial function, the sirtuin function, the histone deacetylases, the sirtuins, they don't work properly without estrogen. So, I keep like pushing this, I'm always pushing my agenda of women are different. We need more studies. But we don't have the ability to tell fat tissue to make more good estrogen. We don't. So after menopause, we just want to do everything to have a healthy body composition, healthy lifestyle, and then acknowledge that our bodies gave up the ghost on making estrogen and just take some in some form, the best that you can get into somebody, so that we at least have better. So we don't have these uncontrolled macrophages running around our body, eating up our bones, eating up our brain, eating up our arteries. We don't want that. And we want to be able to make energy. So we have energy everywhere in our bodies.
Okay, one more question. Do you monitor levels for inflammation, or are there any other tests that you use?
Big time. I'm a big monitor of everything. So I love non-invasive tests. So I do all kinds of inflammation markers. I get, of course, the standard HSCRP, which never used to be the standard, right? But I like to, I'll often get LP, little a, I'll get lipoprotein lipase. That's the LPPLA2. I will get MPO. I like to get ADMA, that's a surrogate marker for nitric oxide, homocysteine. So I am a big blood draw monitor person. I want to check for autoimmunity. After menopause, the incidence of rheumatoid arthritis skyrockets, and we do not like that. Sjogren's syndrome, dry eyes, skyrockets. We need to be aware of this. And it's related to, loss of estrogen and gut microbiome changes. So we want to be on top of that, really. So yes, and I love to get carotid artery, look at the intima. So, that's non-invasive. I like to get echocardiograms too, because women have this condition that is ignored predominantly by cardiologists called mild diastolic dysfunction. It's only females get that, So it's actually due to a low energy state in the heart. The heart is so critically important for producing energy, and estrogen not only has receptors on the mitochondria and the myocytes, but estrogen metabolites actually have their own receptors in the heart. Estrogen related receptors are in the heart to help, so estrogen is necessary for whatever the ligand is. We don't even know what it is that binds, but estrogen is key to the heart having adequate estrogen, having adequate energy. And after menopause, when you don't have enough energy production in the heart, it gets to be stiffer. It looks like when it relaxes, so the heart contracts and relaxes. And the relaxing part, which is the diastolic part, it's like stiff. And you can see that on an echocardiogram. That's a sure sign that the heart is energy deficient. And that's important to know. That's a precursor to, over time, increased incidence of cardiac arrhythmias and heart failure. And but the cardiologists say, oh, that's normal. It's like saying every disease of aging is normal, so we'll ignore it. But only when it's women and it's diastolic dysfunction, they just ignore it.
So let's say we send somebody for a echo, and we find this stiffness as you mentioned it.
Right.
So
that means that for sure. Okay. Well, hopefully you can get them on estrogen. You want to look at the level. Okay. And then, you might want to do other things that support the energy production, like acetyl L-carnitine, CoQ10, sort of like your alpha lipoic acid. So, your energy support system that you'd want to kind of, and exercise. Exercise creates mitogenesis. So you want to combine all the tools of the trade to try to increase energy production. And if you see low energy in the heart, guess where else you're going to have low energy?
Right.
In the brain. Yeah.
Okay.
Surrogate marker for the brain.
Do you do any cytokine testing at all?
Well, you know what? I don't think I used to. I don't really do that because I think they're kind of unreliable. They're very fleeting and hard to, like because they come and go. So that's what HSCRP is. It's a surrogate marker for inflammatory cytokine circulation because they've shown that your HSCRP goes up in relation to circulating cytokines. So it's a surrogate marker. So I look at that predominantly. I think I use, myeloperoxidase. I think I have enough inflammation markers that, and of course, insulin resistance is sort of an indirect marker of inflammation as well, because inflammation drives insulin resistance. So I get like what's called the insulin resistance score. That includes like a C-peptide and insulin level, and it's a calculated kind of a score that you can get through Quest. So it's mainstream, Cleveland Heart Lab, which is Quest. So it's mainstream lab. And it helps you to know, because if you have insulin resistance, you're pretty much sure that you have metabolic dysfunction, you have inflammation, and you better get on top of it.
On the HSCRP, what levels are you looking at for, there's the normal, and then there's, what we look for. What are your? Well,
100%, I want it below 3, because that has been shown, in the Jupiter trial to be like the most dangerous if it goes above 3. But, I always like to strive for optimal, which is well below 1, but I'm also a realist, it's, but I go for the gold as much as I can. The goal is to be well under 1, but, people, I don't want to get people all riled up, if they can at least stay under 3 while we keep working on it, I always say, work in progress. And then I look at what else can we do to lower inflammation and inflammatory cytokines. And, there's always more to be done, right? Stress, sleep, diet, exercise, weight, hormones.
Can you still see me? I got a message saying I was signed out because I'm signed in somewhere else. Am I still on with you?
I see you.
Okay, good. Okay, I don't know. I got, all day it's been, I don't know, the gremlins. Okay, just a quick plug. So first of all, we can't thank you enough. I mean, you weren't expecting this, and we certainly weren't expecting you. This was just fantastic. And my only regret is that we can't seem to get more participants. So, Dr. Gerber, I see you lurking there. We need your crew, and everybody else. If we could get more of a fan club here. You were kind and gracious, and we can't thank you enough. And Dr. Gersh is going to be with us in Las Vegas, March 25th to 27th. I'll have a new flyer out probably within the next day or two with the latest lineup. We have Dr. Campbell coming also. We have Pauline Tai, Dr. Gerber, he's coming. So we have some really, some of the real lights of the anti-aging world for our tiny little group. And
Sounds exciting.
And this is the first time. Yes, Dr. Gerber, you're muted. Unmute. So you're muted.
I can't lip read.
Unmute. How'd I do?
There you go.
Oh, you did it.
Now we
Hey, all right. These funny computer things. Yeah, I just got my Zoom stuff here this last week. Great lecture. We sure would like to get a copy of it. We're going to read your book. And I bet you never ran into Jonathan Wright back in the 80s.
Well, not in the 80s, but in the early 2000s. I met him.
Well, bless him and his whole dominance of estriol giving. And so this is really, your lecture really opened my eyes to some new frontiers. Thank you very, very much.
Well, you know what? We just always have to go with the flow as new data shows up.
Right.
That's why.
So Michael,
and Dr. Clearfield, I think he's a brilliant idea, these Tuesday lectures. And I just hope we can get copies of Dr. Gersh's lecture and the lovely visuals. And hope we get to meet her in Vegas here in the spring. And once again, we'll try to get the homeopathic guys more cranked up to catch your Tuesday night lecture series. Very, very good.
Well, we have been doing this for over a year now. I don't do that.
Oops.
And I just
Oops.
put it in the chat, aosrd.org/webinars. That's where we post the videos if it's okay with the speaker. We always ask if it's okay to post
Sure.
the video.
Yeah.
If it's okay with you, then we do. I don't think anybody's turned us down yet, but you know, we try to make sure that you know, we get, you know, their permission. So so aosrd.org/webinars. That's where all of the videos are. So there's some slide decks also. That's where all the videos for all of our lectures are. There's well over a year's worth there. We've been doing this since a year ago, last November. I get a message. Okay, I'll take care of that in a sec. And for the conference, if you aosrd.org, it'll give you information on the conference. We're at the Flamingo Hotel. We have a great room rate, especially, you know, with the explosion in prices of everything. We got, you can go from Thursday to Sunday. It's the 25th to the 27th is the conference for less than $400. You know, just for the room rate, which is like not even $100 a day in Vegas on the Strip. And the Flamingo Hotel is a little bit run down, but you know, it'll do. It's not the Venetian.
It's okay.
but it's what we could afford. So we're really looking forward to it because we have a really great lineup. One of the reasons, so you don't know this, Dr. Gersh, but our group's been around since 1972, and the lectures that Dr. Spear can let us know, or Renza, they're on here, have always been in Reno because they're from the East Coast and they like to come out here to go skiing, which there's plenty of this week.
Oh boy.
But it's a much easier travel to Vegas.
Yeah, much easier.
Because it's only one plane ride, and like I said, we have a great rate, and we have I think we're going to have a couple of you know, surprises like we always do. We've had in the past, we've done a Sinatra night, we've done a murder mystery dinners, so we have some fun too. I mean, we have a really fun group. We're not you know, old sticks in the mud here. So
great.
With that, let's see, somebody wrote, I would love to hear, oh, that's just for me, update on TBI work, hormones and neurotransmitters. Okay, actually I'm working on an update, and I'm actually presenting it to some outfit in Phoenix, Arizona at the end of February, FSM. I think they do, I don't know what they do exactly. They do some sort of electromagnetic something or other. I'll figure it out. I'll let you know what it is at another time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else have any? Yeah, Dr. Gerber.
I know this is off the subject, but who was your infectious disease presenter 2 weeks ago? What was his name?
Is that Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Andrew Campbell. He'll be there also, by the way.
Yeah, that was striking. That mold and mycotoxins have no data to support binders. That really blew me away.
Yeah. So,
thank you.
I like your drawing.
You are a great group. Yeah, I like it too. It's adorable.
Thank you. I cannot thank you enough. If I had known this was going to happen, I would have sent you a Christmas card at least, or something, or whatever, or a holiday.
Okay.
I always feel like we don't do enough for you know, our speakers. So, but we look forward to it. Now I had you since I got you on the spot here. I had you scheduled for January 25th. Are you going to come back, or was this it?
No, if you want me to. If you're not, you know.
Like I said, I have endless Tuesdays. I have endless Tuesdays to fill.
We can do that. No problem.
I mean, I got, if you look in the chat here, you know, just every.
I can talk about fasting. If I can talk about fasting, then people want to hear about that.
Super presentation. Thank you so much. Great lecture. Great talk, doctor. And
my pleasure.
Up and down.
Follow me on my Instagram live, or at least like me or something, so I can have more numbers.
Okay, we'll do.
Live.
I'll have this posted within usually 48 hours. unless something happens and I forget and I don't get to it till next Tuesday when I remember again. So,
Whatever.
well,
You won't
uh,
hear from me. You won't hear from me. So,
okay. All right.
well,
Thank
have a
you.
good night and
Thank
happy
you all
New
so
Year,
much.
everyone.
Yeah, everybody have a good New Year. We'll see you next
Okay.
week. We have Dr. Carlfeld from Dr. Halas's group, and they're going to talk about COVID and methylene blue and all that stuff that I don't understand anything about.
Happy New Year.
Okay, thank
Happy New
you.
Year.
Bye, happy New Year.
Bye.
Thank you,
for
Inga.
the presentation.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To our new people, thank you. Thank you for coming in also.